All right, hello. Thank you everyone for being here. My name is Kay Malady, and this is A Picture and 1,000 Words, Writing Graphic Novels. All right, we've got a lot of really good questions, and I want to get into it with the time that we have. So there is space at the end for questions from the audience, as opposed to just the questions that I've prepared. So first up, we have Amparo Ortiz. She is the author of Blaze Wrath Games and Dragon Blood Ring, and I think if we look, I think we can see one of her writings there in the background of her picture there, so take a look. She was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and currently lives on the island's northeastern coast. She's published short story comics in Marvel's Voices, Comunidades, #1, and is the Eisner Award-winning Puerto Rico Strong. When she's not teaching ESL, which is very cool, she's streaming K-pop videos, vlogging for her YouTube channel, and writing about worlds both contemporary and fantastical. So we're really excited to have her. Additionally, we have Bobby Nash here with us. Bobby Nash is not a man of action, a detective, or a hero, but he loves writing about characters that embody all of those traits and more. He is an award-winning author of novels, comic books, short stories, screenplays, and more. He's a member of the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers and International Thriller Writers. On occasion, he even acts, appearing in movies and TV shows, usually standing behind or beside your favorite actor, but sometimes they let him speak, which is why we're very excited to hear him speak today. From time to time, he also puts pen to paper and doodles, usually on envelopes. At the end, I'm going to let each of them tell you where you can see them again, and we'll do a little call to action with where you can find out more about them. Especially, I personally am really curious to learn more about Bobby and the stuff that we might have seen him in on TV. Okay. Next, we have Dan Jolley. Dan began writing professionally at age 19. He started out in comic books. He has worked for major publishers such as DC Firestorm, Marvel for Doctor Strange, Dark Horse, Aliens, and Image for G.I. Joe. He soon branched out into licensed property novels like Star Trek, film novelizations like Iron Man, and original novels, including the middle grade urban fantasy series 5 Elements, the urban sci-fi Grey Widow trilogy, and the Southern Fried Stephen King mystery thriller, The Storm. Let's see. He wrote for video games too. What's a triple threat for a graphic novel panel, I guess. But he's also done writing for video games and has contributed storylines, characters, and dialogue to titles such as Transformers, War for Cybertron, Prototype 2, and Dying Light, among others. His latest work includes the best-selling Audible original middle grade urban fantasy audiobook House of Teeth, the middle grade sci-fi graphic novel The Mega Dogs of New Kansas, and the high fantasy detective novel The Runemaster Homicide. He currently lives with his wife and some largely inert felines, which they're all inert, right, in Northwest Georgia. Again, we'll get more information on how you can find out about him and all of those fascinating projects once we finish our panel. And last but not least, we've got Danny Gorny. Danny Gorny is a freelance writer in Toronto. He's been producing comics since 2018. Since 2020, he's published 3 anthologies, 4 chapters of his graphic novel Sleepwalkers, and launched the sci-fi series Cygnus Imperium. He enjoys medieval literature and electronic music. So thank you all so much, all 4 of you, for being here. Oh my goodness, the resumes on you 4 is just wow. So I think some of the bios may have already told us this a little bit, but I know I will not be the only person listening that's curious. How do you get into graphic novels, right? So now from my list, I've got you all. Dan is first, Danny, then Bobby, then Amparo. That's just how it shows up. So if you don't mind, let's just go down the line. How do you get into graphic novels?
There really isn't a way to get into graphic novels. I've heard people say in the past that it's like a supervillain lair. Like if somebody figures out how to get in, then they go and block off that way to make it impossible for anybody else to do it that way. I got in through the sheerest of sheer luck. I was 19. I had been reading comic books my whole life. I had been writing short stories for my own amusement. And I had gone to visit my older sister where she lived in Macon, Georgia. And during that trip, I went to the mall, to the video arcade. That's how long ago this was. This is back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And I met a girl there. She was actually the arcade attendant, and I asked her out. And on our first date, I told her that I like to write short stories, and she said, "Have you ever considered writing comic books?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, I know a couple of comic artists here in Macon, and I could introduce you." So I was like, "Yeah, sure, okay." And that turned out to be Craig Hamilton and Tony Harris. And I ended up working with Tony for at least a decade. They read some of the short stories that I had done, decided that I did not walk on my knuckles, and began introducing me to editors. And as we are all aware here, editors are the gatekeepers. They're the firewall. The editor is the one who can say yes or no to something getting approved. So yeah, the first editor they introduced me to was a guy named Dan Thorsland at Dark Horse Comics. And so the first story I ever actually had published was a little 16-page Aliens. It was in the Aliens franchise in an anthology simply called Dark Horse Comics. And I haven't looked back since then.
I have to ask before Danny, just because I'm curious, and I did literally just read your bio out loud. Was the arcade attendant Tracy?
No.
Did she get you into the comics, and then you went off into the sunset separately?
No, not at all. In fact, Tracy did not know that she was a nerd before we got married. And I have introduced her to her inner nerd since then. So yeah, now we have like dragons and gargoyles around the house. It's awesome.
Oh, how fun. Awesome. Well, thanks, Dan. All right, Danny, how about you? How did you get into graphic novels?
The roundabout way, I suppose. I was always reading graphic novels and comics when I was little, including to and from arcades, much like Dan, because I'm also old people, I guess. Maybe not, I don't know. Maybe not so gray, but also I've shaved recently. And then I went and studied literature and have just done a whole lot of terrifying corporate work. So I realized a few years ago that, I should probably do something with fiction since I'm not so much professionally. And a certain American president had recently happened, which made it a very compelling case to write the sort of stories I want to write, which are, sort of about this sort of positive power of multiculturalism and things like that. At the time, this was slightly less politically motivated, but whatever. So I started writing, and I never really wrote fiction before, but medieval literature is a thing, and a lot of things that you study are page design, and I can do graphic design and things like that. So I wrote out the comic as I would like to read it, because I'm really good at ekphrasis, and did that. Spent a couple of years trying to find an illustrator, finally did. Got into production with that and like a bunch of other projects, and got my first book out on Kickstarter like 2 weeks before the lockdown started for the pandemic. And have absolutely failed to network with anybody ever since. But I decided when that all started, I figured it was going to last for a while. And, I think a lot of people took the pandemic as an opportunity to pivot. And I decided to go heads down and really work on improving my practice, which is why I've got so many projects finished. I do finish things, and I'm still just producing other things and trying to get as much stuff done while I can, while I've still got all this energy for it. And hopefully I will also eventually meet an editor eventually, if conventions ever happen again.
Fingers crossed, right? And I will say you
I think they are in the States. In Canada, they've just sort of vaguely started. Like I went to something like a couple weeks ago. I'm actually tabling at something in 2 days. So that'll be like a month in the past when this airs. And that'll be my first convention appearance. And I'll actually get to meet fans in real life. So I've just been stuck on Kickstarter and hoping for the best to build a crowd.
Yeah, well, and you really have been incredibly productive. Everything that you've published since 2020. Bravo, man. So, well, all right, Bobby, how about you? How did you get into graphic novels?
Yeah, I when I first had the itch to try to get in, the do-it-yourself model wasn't really a thing. I graduated from high school in 1989, and that was kind of when I was really going, I want to try this as and at that point, you really, if you wanted to, make a living at this or to make any money at it, you really had to submit and work for someone. And so I had very little success. I had very limited success with that. I was doing a lot of stuff on our own, where we'd go to shows with comics that we had like printed out on a copy machine and stapled together ourselves, and local stuff like that. And my first professional comic writing gig, it was one of those weird things. I came home one Friday night from my day job, and I was just very frustrated. And I went and I got on the internet, and I found every comic book publisher, no matter the size, that had an email address, and I emailed them and said, here's a sample of my work. I want to write stuff, probably not the most professional of ways to do it, but that's what I did. Out of all of I think I sent out 60 or 70 emails that weekend. One person responded with sorry, we're a very small company, and actually we're closing our doors, but thanks for writing. And a year later, that same person was working at a publisher and says, hey, we need a writer. Send me a sample. And so I sent a sample. They liked it, hired me to work on a book for them. And so, as you all know, once you have a book in your hand, it's easier to get other work. So once I was working in comics and I had physical copies in hand, I could go to cons or to editors and say, hi, I'm a writer. I've written this. And that helps. And then from there, it just kind of rolled. So it was weird. I'm one of the only, I don't know if too many people that got in from like submitting stuff. So I consider myself, very fortunate that it worked, because really, looking at it now, I look back on it now, and it's like, that was probably the dumbest thing I ever did, but it worked. So
it worked. No, I think it worked.
Yeah. Because it's one of those things where having it in your hand, having something done makes it a lot easier, because when you talk to editors and you say, hi, I'm a writer, and they go, well, what have you written? And you say, well, I'm working on my first, and you can see the glaze literally, go over their eyes. But if you put something in their hands, not only does it show, like Danny said, you finished something, which is very important to editors, knowing you can finish. You've got something tangible in your hand, and you've bought a minute because they're going to stop and flip through it. So you've at least earned yourself a minute, And nowadays, of course, with people, you can do a lot of this stuff on your own and have something in your hand. And it's considered more viable than it was back then. Because, in the 80s and 90s, if you were doing print on demand, it just meant you weren't good enough to get hired by a real publisher.
Exactly.
And that attitude has changed. It is not looked down on, that you are doing it yourself, that you are becoming a small business like it was then.
And I think I may throw this at you all. It's not a question. I think that may be something we'll want to talk about too, is sort of how is it changed? What do we do? There does seem to be some gatekeeping aspect that I'll definitely want to get into if we have time. But all right, Amparo, how about you? How did you get into graphic novels?
I think gatekeeping is the best way to start off my story, because it is true. There are editors, but there are also literary agents who are the ones that editors mostly rely on to find new talent, basically because they have, these pre-existing relationships, and they trust the agents to bring them quality work instead of just general submissions. And in my case, I never actually wanted to write for comics or be a graphic novelist in any sense of the word. I only wanted to write just things for myself. I never wanted to get published until I was 17 years old. And then I started my first novel. It was a young adult fantasy, and it was very aimless. I didn't even finish it until after I graduated from my bachelor's. I took it up again when I was in law school, and then I dropped out of law school because all I did in law school was write. And then during class. And then I got my master's in literature, and I realized, no, I need a literary agent. I want to be published. But I read comics. I engaged with pop culture that was surrounding comics, but I never saw myself in that world as a creator until later on. In 2015, I signed with a literary agent. And then at the end of 2017, it was a really rough year for my country. I live in Puerto Rico, and we went through 2 very devastating hurricanes. And so at the end of 2017, a publisher called Lion Forge actually contacted my agent and asked if she represented any Puerto Rican or Latinx authors that worked in comics or were interested in comics. And she was like, so are you interested? Because I know you wrote a script that we eventually shelved because it was a mess, but I had expressed some form of interest in writing scripts. And so she was like, are you interested in this? It's a short story. They need it in, like, the first draft, they need it in 4 days. Are you okay with that? And I'm like, I'll give it a shot, because the project was specifically to help my country with hurricane relief efforts. So it was a personal cause, and I was very interested just because of that. But Lion Forge ended up accepting the draft and revising with me. They actually paired me with another artist who is from my country as well, and we became friends, etc. And then, because of Puerto Rico Strong, HarperCollins actually called us and was like, do you think Amparo would like to write a middle grade fantasy for us, a graphic novel? And I'm like, oh, this would be like my first middle grade book, and it would be my first time writing in a non-anthology work within graphic novels and comics. I was like, okay, fine, let me audition for it. I auditioned and I got the part. And I also, my very first book deal, which has not been announced yet, funnily enough, I have a few books out, but my very first book deal, that book has not been published yet. And that is a graphic novel. That is a young adult fantasy as well. It's a retelling of something. I wish I had, the okay to share more information, but it is a graphic novel. And I also auditioned for it and I got the part. And it's been, invitations from editors. Marvel, my contribution to Marvel was also them asking if I wanted to take part in their anthology. And I have another graphic novel opportunity in the works, which is also an invitation. So I would say that I'm not normal, because I'm essentially just a novelist who was very curious about the form and the world and the industry and tried my hand at it. And it just so happened that all those years of consuming it as a reader, not necessarily as practicing it as a writer, helped me to some degree. And yeah, that's my story.
Awesome. Well, and maybe, when this airs, we'll be closer. You'll either have been able to announce, or we'll be closer and we'll be able to talk about it that day, or you'll only have to wait a little longer for that.
I hope so.
May I ask, do you work with Stephanie Stein at Harper?
I know Stephanie. I actually read a book for her to blurb, which is very wild to me that I got that request, but I know Stephanie. Yes, she's amazing.
She's the lead editor on all the Warriors graphic novels that I do.
So cool.
Small world.
Yeah.
Yes.
I really bet it is. I bet it is such a small world. Definitely.
And I think one of the important things too that come out of what everybody has said here too is once you broke in, that one project leads to the next project, that you kind of build your resume, and then people they see one thing and know you can, want you to do something else because they liked this book you wrote, or they know you can handle, certainly doing media tie-ins. If you do characters that you didn't create, if you do that and do it well, more places will contact you to do that type of thing because they already know you can handle it, because there's a lot of rules to writing characters, especially corporate characters like Transformers or Spider-Man or whatever. There's a lot of rules. So they want writers that they understand already know those rules.
Yeah.
And so that kind of becomes helpful as you go.
Jumping off of Bobby's point, since I unfortunately am merely an independent creator at this stage, one of the things I noticed in terms of getting stuff done and having something to show for yourself is that still helps you even early on in your career. One of the best things I did for my graphic novel project is just hire a friend to do like a one-off piece, just as like a mood sketch for the project. And I made a one sheet out of that, use that to network my way into an actual illustrator, use that project, to go find other illustrators for other things as I wrote them, because no one wants to work with someone who's got a reputation for not paying as an independent creator, or whose work isn't going to get done, right?
Yes.
So
yes, finishing
anything to show for yourself
Yeah.
really does help get you on the path past the script.
Mhm.
In
Yeah,
the novel field, I've heard this phrase of, how do you sell your next book by your last book? And it kind of sounds like it's similar for graphic novel. If you have something, you've shown you can do it, and that's what'll get you to that next project. I think that's what Bobby said. Even Danny, I think even independently, I think that's probably, if you've shown you can produce something, that's what's going to get you backers next time, and that sort of thing.
And that's what's going to get illustrators to be happy to work with you. They need to get paid if they're fully independent as well.
Yeah. And it really is a small industry. For as big as it is, editors talk to each other, So, if I'm pitching an editor and I say, well, I've worked on this stuff, those editors probably talk to each other. And it's not just what the work is, because especially, comics is very much like you write a novel, you write the whole thing, you send it off to edits. Comics, you're in and out of the process. You've plotted it, it goes to edits. You do the script, you go to edits. You the art starts, you get with edits. There's a lot more back and forth in that. So not only is it how do you work, but how are you to work with? That makes a big difference. If you are easy to work with, more work comes your way because you're not a problem child. That helps. I mean, that is a big factor in what you can do. Unless you're like super, super, super big name talented, then you can, but
Do what you want.
Yeah. But for the most part, though, I mean, it is true. I mean, like any other business, there's the professionalism is, needs to be there. But like I said, it's a small industry and people talk. So if you're difficult to work with, that comes across. If you're easy to work with, that comes across, and that helps.
Yeah, the time when that changes is when you do make a publisher a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're a big cash cow, the rules change. In fact, at Harper, I was talking to an editor who was making reference to this young readers series that was incredibly successful, had made them just bajillions of dollars. And the author, it was a writer illustrator, and the author was a nightmare. Like everyone hated this person, but they got the creator got to do whatever they want, and everyone was like, okay, whatever you say, yes, please give us more.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that. I've definitely heard that. Well, I think, Bobby, you really kind of hit my next question, and I know that Danny's even mentioned sort of writing about this before. How is it different? I mean, what's different? Someone coming from a novel background, or maybe even an unpublished novel background, but what's different about writing a novel versus writing a graphic novel? I mean, you've mentioned plot, script as separate things, which we don't normally think about as separate so much in a novel. So what's different?
Well, I guess the first big thing is most of what I write in a comic or a graphic novel, the reader never sees. I write a lot of information for the artist that the artist translates, or, because, all these details I'm putting in about, what the character's thinking or what the place looks like, or, that's really for the team, my teammates, to know what we're thinking, what needs to go in the art, because it really is a art driven medium. So you want as much to come through the art as you can. And so it really is like when I write novels, it's all me. It's up to me to paint the picture, to get everything across to the reader. In doing a comic, I'm part of a team. So it's up to me to do it in a way to let the artist know what we're thinking. And then the artist does their part. And a lot of times the art will then adjust the script, because the artist may draw the panels in a way that gets across the message where we can lose dialogue, or vice versa. We need to add a little something because it didn't come across like we thought it would. And so it's very much, it's probably closer to working in movies and TV, but where the actor can come in and go, I don't want to say it that way. Can I say it this way? It's kind of that same kind of back and forth with the writer and artist, because it's not just the writer's vision when it goes. The artists are adding elements to it. And when it works incredibly well because the artist and the writer are each bringing something new to it.
And how's plotting? Like when we think about plotting a novel, we talk about 3-act structure or hero's journey or save the cat, all those things. Whereas a graphic novel or presumably comics, they're more episodic. Is that part different when you're writing for graphic novels versus or pieces in anthologies versus sort of a longer novel?
I think that's really interesting. If you don't mind,
Please.
Or if it's not my time, that's totally
No,
cool.
it is. It's everybody.
No, jump in. Yeah.
Okay. This is actually what I prepped. If this helps.
Awesome.
So yeah, I think as Bobby was saying, writing a graphic novel and producing a graphic novel really is, I think, halfway between prose and film, because you've got all those production processes like in film, but it's still this very sort of small audience for the script. Like it's not, 100 people have to just deal with that to make everything work. It's interesting. I've worked on both of those other things, and I like how small comics is for how big your team is. But yeah, so what I find to be one of the most interesting challenges with, I think, moving past, the plotting stage and going to scripting, is how you have to write to the medium. The fundamental unit in a comic is the page or the panel. And in film, like, you've got actual motion. In panels, you've got these juxtaposed images that are doing things, and you can't overwhelm the reader with dialogue. You can't draw too many pictures or else it's just gonna be confusing. Like, you've got to really limit like what a page says. And so structurally, the way I've come to start thinking about it is, what is the story on this page? Like that's like the fundamental thing. Like, what is this page doing? Does it do that? Okay, what is this 2-page spread doing? Does it do that? What is this like 8-page chunk? Because like 6 to 16 pages is a short story. A lot of open call anthologies are like 8 pages these days. What is this part of the story doing, even if it is part of a 3-act structure for a whole issue of a comic, right? And then, okay, well, what's this 22 to 24 page chapter doing at that level? So I really lean into the medium. Like, I like to have a cliffhanger right before the reader flips the page. Mm-hmm. You can force that in a comic script, but you can't do that in a novel, right?
Yeah. Those page turn reveals.
So
you have to plan those. Yeah. I mean, really.
Yeah. And I love doing that because you're taking advantage of the medium for what it's best at. So like, one of the things to think about that's really, really different, I think unique to graphic novels, because it's your problem as the writer. In a film, there's an art department and they can do a lot of that work. And what's the acting like? Well, that's a director's problem. Then the actors just have to do all the labor, and then there's all the crew to like make that land, right? As the writer, you get to sort of write the book as you imagine the reader is going to see it, then watch it sort of get filled in, and then in editing stages scramble and fix things and make sure it just sticks the landing.
So like, I learned to write first with graphic novels, with comic books, with commercial comic books, like for Dark Horse and Marvel and such. And I think it's safe to say that comics is one of, if not the most restrictive forms to write in. Like, you've got a set number of pages, no exceptions, because that's what the budget is for. Depending on the artist you're working with, you have a set number, like a maximum number of panels on a page. You like Danny was saying, you have to be really mindful of the ratio of art to text, because it's not a novel and you don't want people to just read this enormous page of text. I had been writing comics for about, 8 or 10 years, and then got the opportunity to do a novel. It was a media tie-in novel. It was a Star Trek, in fact, a short Star Trek novel that I co-wrote with another novelist named Scott C. Ensign. And I didn't even know if I could do it at that point. Like, well, I used to write short stories, but I've never written any long form prose. But the way I think about it, I don't know if you guys have seen the episode of Seinfeld where Kramer decides that the lanes are too narrow on the streets, and he takes a can of black paint and paints over some of the dividing lines and makes these like double wide lanes. And they're like, oh, it's so luxurious. Wow, I can just drive anywhere. And that was what it felt like going from writing comics to writing novels. Like, I can make this chapter as many pages as I want. I can have this dialogue just go on as long as it needs to. Holy crap, it's amazing. I think if you learn to write comics first, that makes basically every other kind of writing a lot easier. Mm-hmm. Like I know novelists who have said, oh, writing comics is so hard. And like I did a series for Learner that's basically like Choose Your Own Adventure, but it's a mixture of prose and sequential art. And basically you were writing to a flow chart because it was like one story with 22 different endings. Writing for video games where you need a cutscene that is 90 seconds. Exactly. And like having learned to write comics first, all of that stuff was like, oh, okay. It's, these are the parameters, and then this is what you got to do to satisfy it. So I guess that's my advice is learn to write comics.
First
if you can, I guess. Yeah.
Get it right.
I think also something that, I would like to echo everyone, of course. And something that I've noticed with my students, because I'm an ESL professor. So some of my students are huge fans of, for example, superhero movies, but they don't read comics, or they illustrate, but they don't actually train themselves to illustrate better or to learn form or practice more. They just do it because they love it. And, it's great. But if you eventually want to be published, you need to understand format, structure, writing arcs, etc. I feel like one of the things that I've noticed changing from alphabetic text or novels to graphic novels and short story comics is that when you're reading, or for example, when I'm reading, I'm looking for each page in a short story comic or in a graphic novel to have its own arc somehow. Yes, plot is important, but there should be an emotional arc kept as well. If I'm not invested in what's happening and it just looks cool, I stop reading. The colors, everything can be so vibrant and so impressive, but if the story is not intriguing and I'm not feeling attached to anyone or to the outcomes, then I just stop reading. And I feel like a lot of, going back again to the gatekeeping topic that we were addressing earlier, I feel like that's why a lot of work gets rejected as well. We associate a visual medium with looking a certain way, but we're not looking at it from the perspective of how does it make us feel? Are we invested? Is this logical? And also giving us some sort of look into the world or ourselves. You have talent, but do you have vision? And I feel like when it's in comic form, it's much harder to have vision than it is to have talent, because a lot of people could potentially write a script and they could potentially illustrate panels, an entire page, an entire story. But is it actually telling you something? Is it telling you a story? Not necessarily. And I feel like a lot of people go, or a lot of my students personally, and actually a lot of my colleagues in the young adult and middle grade spheres will be like, oh, I want to write comics. It looks so fun. And I'm like, does it? Are you sure? Do you love yourself? So it's just a matter of being aware of how much harder it can be to be creative in a way that feels also genuine when you're working with more compact spaces to be genuine and talented and authentic.
Yeah, and I think too, we're talking about the writing side of it here, but the artist, as a comic book artist, is not just someone that draws pretty pictures. An artist is also telling a story. Yes. The best artists are the ones, if you look at the page, even without the dialogue, you have some idea of what's going on. They're moving, they're drawing it in a way where your eye knows to go this way. Your eye follows the flow of the action. They're making sure that if there's two characters on a panel, the character that's talking first is on the left side of the panel. These are very important things, but they're telling a story as well. So it's not just, like you said, a lot of your students draw pretty pictures, but they have to, and that's a good start, but you have to figure out how to tell a story in pictures as well. And I think that's just like writing comics. It's not easy to draw comics either. It's more than, it's not just sketching a picture of Spider-Man, which a lot of people can do. It's how do you draw Spider-Man doing something and it makes sense.
Well, and that kind of takes me to another question that I think that we have here. And I do want to split it a little bit into what I'm going to call traditional or trad publishing, right? We call that in the novel field versus independent. Let's talk about artists. So I think, Danny, you've already mentioned a little bit that as an independent creator, you're searching for the artist, right? How do you find an artist in the independent? And then I want to reach out and say, let's talk trad. What about artists there? But.
So my process usually starts with a script. And I've got this story, and then I'll randomly troll Facebook or Twitter or whatever, see people posting some portfolio pieces. If I'm writing something like, production still takes a while. Like, it's not a movie, but it still takes a while. So it doesn't really matter when it gets done. But if I see someone's work I like, maybe I'll reach out and ask about their rates and see what I can afford. Or, maybe I'm just like, oh my God, you're the person for this. I just wrote, like, I was doing a bunch of short stories, I guess, in the spring of 2020. After the pandemic started, I was just like, I need to do something. Let's go do these historicals and just do something for myself, try and get better. And, then I saw someone who just posted really great art in a really good style. That was like, yeah, I want you for this story. So I just reached out for him and did that, right? And then wrote another one, did that. That became a small anthology I published last year. So it's this sort of ongoing process for me. I'm now working with an illustrator that I did some work with before, where we know each other a little bit better. So I'm writing more for her, which is really, really different. And we're collaborating from the beginning on this, but we've already agreed to share the IP. So of course we're collaborating on this.
And the independent, it's you. I mean, that's the control that you have as an independent creator. You're picking the artist, you're doing these things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If it's my money,
yeah,
I've got to pay the artist before I have a book to sell. Unless I get really lucky and the artist is, willing to work on some sort of contingency or for part of the IP. And I've been a freelance human for long enough to know to pay your people. So usually the conversation on my side of things is, okay, well, what can I afford? I learned how to letter. It makes a lot of smaller projects easier and cheaper. Plus, I can contribute more in other projects because I can't draw. Well, I guess I can draw. I can't draw well, and it's not worth it. And I'm definitely focusing on the writing. So yeah, from the independent side of things, you have to negotiate your IP, your payments, maybe just points on whatever the crowdfunding is or whatever. There's lots of things you can negotiate like any other contract, but whether you find someone whose work you want to write for, or you have the project and you find the right person for it, you still have to go through all of those phases.
And how is that different for the more traditional, for Dark Horse, or for ones that have an editor attached to it? Do you get to pick the artist? How does, presumably you're not paying the artist, right? But how is that different?
Well, you can show up with a team already and pitch projects to a publisher and sell it. I've been a part of that, but just for the purposes of this discussion, we'll focus on what happens more often is you as a writer approach an editor, sell a concept, sell a script, and at some point down the line, they pick an artist. So like, I don't know how many times I have sold a script and gotten paid for it and moved on to another project. And like 6 months later, the editor sends me an email, hey, we've decided on an artist for this thing. So because of that, all of my scripts always just, I write them as much as I can to stand on their own. Because I don't know, I might not know who's going to be drawing this. Now, it's better if you can communicate with the artist. And like I mentioned earlier, find out their preferences about panel counts. Like I've worked with some artists who don't want more than 4 panels on a page. But then there are others like George Perez who put 18 panels on a page and make it look good. The point is, you don't always know with a traditional publisher what your project is going to turn into. You sell it and you kind of, it's like fire and forget, and you hope for the best. And in one example, I had been doing work for Tokyo Pop, and I pitched them an original project, and they were like, yes, we like this, let's do it. And I signed a deal, and was working on the first script, and they said, we cannot decide on an artist for this. We've gone round and round and round, and we can't make up our minds. Now, I knew at that time that they were trying to get a prose imprint off the ground. And I said, would you prefer if I just wrote it as a novel? And they said, oh, yeah, go ahead and do that. And so suddenly I was a YA author. But like, that was the extreme of not being able to, like, not knowing about the artist, is that ultimately the artist just didn't even exist. Sometimes that happens.
Yeah, a lot of times because there is when you write for an artist you've worked with before, you can get into a shorthand. You already know what that artist can do. When you're writing and you have no idea, I kind of feel like I tend to overwrite it a little bit. Every detail is there. Whereas if it's somebody I've worked with before and I say they go into a living room, I know I know what they already know that. I don't have to give details. I don't have to say there's a couch, 2 end tables, we can kind of go with that. Or if it's someone you can talk to back and forth, that's always helpful. But yeah, it's sometimes they ask your opinion. We're thinking about this artist. What do you think? But most of the time, yeah, you have no say really on that. The covers, the colors, sometimes they'll give you the option of saying where you want the word balloons, but that's not always the case either. So sometimes those things are out of your hand, once they go to the next stage.
Just as a quick aside, Danny, I also taught myself how to letter. And I think honestly, every comic book writer should learn how to letter, because I think it makes you look at the page differently and in a better way.
Teaches you how to edit.
And yeah, it makes you better at editing and like you get everything fit properly.
Yeah.
Every bit that you learn, helps the practice, because it's such a multidisciplinary field.
Well, so one question and this is on our list, I will say, I'm going to try to, let's talk artistic vision, particularly when you're not an independent creator. And I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, Danny, please correct me. But
I've got things to say.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Well, but let's talk. How do you maintain or uphold your artistic vision when you give them the script and then you pass it off to an artist who is presumably working on, then they're sort of running off the race by themselves. Is there a concern there? Do you have to sort of learn to be more independent? Do you get the opportunity to, those of you in trad, you get the opportunity to say, hey, hold on, that's not how it should go or should look?
Most of the time, in my experience, there's not been a lot, unless something's just so egregiously, somebody's slipping in something that probably shouldn't be there, because that does sometimes happen. It doesn't happen often, but where people put in things, we've seen articles about that. But for the most part, anytime I've gone back, I've gone to the publisher and go, wait, this doesn't, there's something wrong here. They're like, we'll fix it later, or we'll let them fix it, or just write me some more dialogue. You know, it's more, once it's that far in the process, they don't really want to change things.
There's a phenomenon. I fear I'm coming off negative in this panel. I don't mean to. There's a phenomenon where where an artist can hold a book hostage. If say DC has a book that's on a monthly schedule, if they miss a deadline, it costs them money. And so it's possible, not that this has happened to a book I've been working on, where
Not at all. No.
where an artist holds the art until basically it's too late to make any changes. And all of a sudden you're presented with these pages and you're like, that is not what I wrote. And it's too late. And, I mean, if it's egregious enough, or if the editor cares enough about it, sometimes they will make a change. But more than once, I've been presented with art for a project and called the editor and was like, I didn't actually write an Irish pride parade in this scene, and yet there is one. And they're like, yeah, let it go.
Yeah. Yeah. There have been times where I've, if something's important, like with clues, it's what's the old Chekhov's gun thing. If you see, you're going to fire a gun, you need to see the gun beforehand. I remember there was one where these characters are in this room that's filled with just trinkets and odd whatnots. And I know there's an axe we're going to use in like 4 pages. So I put in big bold letters, we need to see an axe somewhere on this page. This is very, very, very important. I get a call from my editor going, the guy didn't draw the axe. And I'm like, well, make him draw it. We don't have time for that. Write some dialogue. So I had to go back and have a character talk about this axe that's not there. That, and it to me, it didn't really work, but that was the solution because there's no time to redraw this.
There was, I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. I'm taking up too much space. I'll make this quick. I wrote a comic for a traditional publisher where the main character was a well-known franchise character, and he was enormous, the way many comic book characters are. And I had him driving this 1965 Cadillac, beautiful, gigantic, appropriate for his size car. Get the pages back, and he's in a Toyota Matrix. And I called up the editor and was like, why is he in a Toyota Matrix and how did he fit into it? And it turned out the artist had some really good reference for a Toyota Matrix and decided to change the car. And that's what happened. And my name is on that comic book.
And I mean, is that, do you feel like your artistic vision is still kept at that point? I mean, I know it's a weird question, but that's, at that point you kind of just have to say, okay, right? I mean, is that how you just let it go?
Well, there comes a point. Yeah. There comes a point where you realize, I mean, it's the team and there's really nothing you can do about it. So you just kind of go, okay.
I think in my case, it has happened before where an artist will add something that wasn't there initially, or will take out something. And that has never bothered me until, well, it bothered me one time because it was actually something that I considered my expertise versus the illustrator's expertise. And in that case, I will be like, oh, this needs to change because it makes no sense. And people who are familiar with this specific thing will know that it makes no sense. So they did change it. And I was really excited about it because I felt very powerful. But for the most part, I do have no ego involved when it comes to what an illustrator will bring in, because I just don't consider myself someone who, I feel like graphic novels and comics in general are more of a team effort than novels for me, even though novels are, of course, a team effort too. But it's mostly you with your work, and then an editor will help you shape your words into something closer to what you imagined initially and what it should be, its best version. And when it comes to comics, I'm like, okay, so this is how I wrote it. How do you see it? Does it make sense how I wrote it? And sometimes our visions aligned. For the most part, I've had total alignment with my illustrators, and then that one mistake was made and I was like, oh no, actually this is a mistake, like an actual mistake, and they corrected it. So
in those situations, sorry, Bobby,
Okay.
but I wonder, in those situations, we have used that term a lot, team, right? You talked about it being a team. Do you consider, Amparo, you said you have no ego. I wonder what about ownership? I mean, at this point, are you sort of giving up some of your, not legal ownership, but your creative ownership, and this becomes, it's not just your character, but it's yours and the artist? Or I mean, and this may be more of a philosophical question that I'm asking, but I just wonder.
Not at all. I love philosophy anyway. But in my case, I think I think I shouldn't be talking about ego then, now that you mention it, because all of my experience with comics or in the graphic novel world, all of it so far has been intellectual property of the publisher that I've been working with. So essentially, I'm in charge of executing the story they bring to me, bringing it to life, so to say, or so to speak. And they are the ones in charge of telling me, these are the bare bones, you just add the meat to it. And we like how you've added meat to other things. Therefore, you are promising to us. But if you don't develop this in ways that feel like it also mirrors our vision for it, then we, of course, intervene and we work together. But for the most part, I think that's why I don't have any ego then associated to this. But also at the same time, in general, I'm very much a team player in that sense. And I feel like it's because I am a Capricorn, for those who believe in astrology or are interested in it in any way. So I'm supposed to be very stubborn and strict with my own stuff. And I am not supposed to let other people tell me what to do with my passions. But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, I think it's just, the point of it is to have the strongest product or the strongest story. And I am fully aware that I'm not going to do that on my own. As awesome as I think I am, I'm not the most awesome person ever in any situation that involves a creative team, because it is very much a team. So
yeah, whenever I get the opportunity, I always tell the publishers, give my phone number and my email address to the artist.
That's good.
If the artist, like because I generally give them a full script, and if I write a 5-panel page and the artist comes back and goes, you know what, this would work better at 6, 99.9% of the time I'm going to go, you're absolutely right, because the artist is thinking that visual, looking at the whole page. So I try to be available to where if the artist comes back and says, what if we did this, here, would this still work? And as long as it still tells the story, it doesn't like send the story off from like a 90-degree tangent. I'm happy with making it look the best it can be. And so I think that's where, like you said, with the no ego, the collaboration comes in, as you're all adding pieces to the puzzle.
And is that a little different, Danny? Yeah, I mean, Danny, there's no publisher. This is all you, right?
Well, he is the publisher. I mean,
you are. I mean, you're the publisher, you're the editor, you own it.
And that's an important thing to think about. Like when you're in production, when I'm in production as a writer, usually I'm wearing the editor hat, right? And I've done editing for other people, and it's not the same thing as doing writing for other people, and doing writing for yourself. Like Dan and Bobby and Amparo were saying, some hills aren't worth dying on, right? And I love it when the illustrator finds a better way to do something. It's great. It doesn't happen often enough in my experience, and I wish it happened more, because that's a thing. But that's a conversation I'm always happy to have. In film, there's a job called script supervisor, who, they're there to make sure that we've got continuity and that everyone's wearing the right costume for the right time, all the lines get shot, like that sort of thing. It's a really, really important job. And that's one of the things I do send art back for, is, my character is it has 2 left hands here. Why? Or, I thought he was left-handed. What's going on with this other panel? Or like, that sort of thing happens sometimes. And that's the sort of thing I'll send back, because that's the artist is in charge of the artist's domain. And if they can't do something consistently, that's their problem, the way I see it. Likewise, sometimes the story just isn't being told right. Like, and in addition to like, and I've absolutely written like the axe needs to be there or the equivalent of that in some of my scripts. The other thing I've started writing in my scripts, especially if I suspect it's like I'm just writing it as an exercise and it's going to sit in a trunk for a while, is this is supposed to be funny. And stuff like that, because again, you never know who you're going to work with and whether they're going to get the mood if you don't literally say so exactly. And because I'm paying the money, the script is a work order, right? Same as in the film. So I get to be really aggressive about that, I guess, where for other IPs you can't. And when I've like written for other people's IPs, and I have done that a little bit, it's not my IP. I mean, hey, here's a better way to do this. Nope. Okay, cool. I'm going to write the best version of the thing you actually want to say, no matter how stupid I think it is, or I'm going to quit. Right. And that's sort of the nature of the business, right? Like who owns the project and whose vision is it? But you still get the chance to do that.
One of the best ways to preserve artistic vision I've found, if possible, is getting thumbnail sketches from the artist. Just really rough stuff to make sure that they understand what the script says. And it's much easier for them to make changes in rough sketches than to finish. I hate asking an artist to make changes to finished art. It's about as fun as an editor asking a writer to make changes to a finished script or a finished manuscript. Make those changes at the outline stage if you can. And getting thumbnail sketches is like the outline stage from the artist.
Right, because there are times when I've seen it where the penciler, especially if you're a penciler and inker, are different people, where your penciler will send in the art and the editor sees it and goes, "Ooh, we need to change this." They don't send it back to the penciler; they tell the inker to change it. And so then the penciler comes like, "What the, this isn't what I drew." So there are steps where things like that can get changed in the process. I've certainly had read books come out in print and read it and go, "That's not what I wrote," and you found out the editor changed some dialogue. It happens. I mean, yeah, it catches you. You notice it, but there's it's just part of the business, I guess.
It sounds like this should be an easy question, but I don't think it is. Can you give the artist too much information to plan your panels, or are you at some point, do you give them a little more independence? Does it depend on the project, the artist, do you?
Well, it depends on the artist, but yes, definitely you can give too much information. My rule of thumb is I put in everything that has to be there and nothing that doesn't. Like if there's a scene where somebody's jogging across a park and then they get struck by lightning, if it doesn't matter who the person is who gets struck by lightning, just that someone does get struck by lightning, then I'm just going to say there's a jogger in the park. And the artist can make it a tall, skinny, red-headed man or a woman in a hijab, whatever they feel like, because it doesn't matter. There are artists, Alan Moore is kind of notorious for describing everything. Like if you've got a scene where someone's standing in a library, he'll put all the titles of the books that you can see on the shelves. He describes every item of clothing that they're wearing and how they're wearing it. Now it's Alan Moore, so it still reads like poetry, but I've talked to artists who, faced with a script that gives that much information, they're like, draw it yourself. This doesn't give me any room to be creative.
Yeah. This would also be a great question to ask a panel of artists, because I know, and I've been guilty of this, when we're giving them panel descriptions, having multiple things happen at one time. Because in your head you're thinking of, they walk through the door into the room and answer the phone. You can't do that in one panel. But we often, because we're not thinking about snapshot, artists will get panels with that kind of description, and they're like, what the heck am I supposed to draw? Or I forget which artist told me this. It was on a panel, and he said, yes, this is what I hate. It's like, this is a 6-panel page. Panel 1, 10,000 barbarians come over the hill. And he's just like, that's panel 1 of 6. So he had to come up with a creative way to do that. So sometimes we write things because they're cool, and the artist looks at it and goes, what are they thinking? Because in our head we see it clearly, but they have to figure out how to work that into the page, and sometimes we don't make that easy on them.
The other option, of course, is to just write the camera angle, which usually helps. Frame it like this. So
I tend to do the camera angles only when I feel it's got to be a bird's eye view, or it's other than that, I usually leave it up to the artist. But unless I've got something just absolutely specific in mind. But it's it can be fun. It can be fun talking, and sometimes talking back and forth to the artist, and just them going like, what were you thinking?
In my case, I also go like brief, but sometimes illustrators will be like, or editors will be like, so is this expression the one that you wanted? Because I'm not as detailed as I should be sometimes, but it's because I don't want to focus too much on telling the illustrator what to do, because I respect that they also have a vision for the work. But at the same time, it's like, no, I should do my job a little bit better because this is not clear. And when something is unclear, then it won't work. So,
And you also have to remember, not everyone has the same experiences. I've worked with artists. I worked with an artist who's in Brazil, and so English is not his first language. We communicate well. I mean, we do well enough, but it's not in the direct communication. It's in these little colloquialisms or sayings that make sense to me. Like, there was one scene in this book where the character is staking out a house. So in the scene I've written, he's in the car on the phone, and I wrote it though as he's sitting behind the wheel. Now, to me, that means he's in the car sitting behind the steering wheel. When we get the art, he's sitting on the sidewalk with his back against the tire.
wow.
Because sitting behind the wheel does not he did
At
not
all,
understand this. So I've heard that kind of thing. I've heard that from other artists too, where it's like, I said something and they're like, the artist's like, what does this mean? Because so sometimes where people live, things are different. Like Southern sayings, like Dan and I would be around all the time, don't always translate to people in other countries. So
you can also give too little information. I saw an example years ago from I don't know who wrote it, some script at DC, but the little snippet that I saw was pages 7 through 10. Batman approaches Cadaver's lair, and like, you're abdicating your responsibility as a writer at that point. You're asking the artist to compose the scene there, and that should be the artist should get a co-writing credit at that point.
Now, I've done that with fight scenes before. We had one where I was doing this one graphic novel with the artist, and it was this supernatural thing. So we had these monsters fighting, and I approached him. I said, look, we're going to have like 4 pages of just knockdown, drag out. And I said, I'll write it, or do you just want to lay it out so you can do it big, what? And so he's like, no, let me do it. And so I was like, great. Nobody can lose an arm, anything like that. And so I just left those 4 pages with just the word fight. And then after we got the art back, I added the appropriate grunts and, whatever's. But so in some, but that whole approaching the layer for 4 pages, that's ridiculous. Yeah.
I love writing fight scenes like that. And I wish I had more opportunities to do it. Again, partially that's not knowing who I'm working with. But yeah, I've done it like, here's a fight scene. Here's the bullet points you've got. You got 3 pages, have fun. Like we've already got the setting, just explore it. And it's so much easier to write than having to get really detailed as to who's punching whom and how.
Yeah, and you get some beautiful things from that. You know, when you let your artist play, you can sometimes get really creative.
I wish the artists were more creative with dialogue scenes like that.
Yeah.
That's cheating.
Well, and that really actually hits probably my last question, the last question we have, and the last on our little list here. And Dan, I think you alluded to it, co-writing credit, right? I mean, how are there conflicts on what billing, I guess, artists get, or how? I mean, we talked a little bit about the ownership aspect, and I don't mean legal ownership. Again, I mean artistic ownership. At what point is the artist more than just doing your vision, but is also a co-writer or a Danny, I think you mentioned, sharing IP. At what point does that happen, and how often?
Well, it kind of just depends on the project. Mm-hmm. Like I created an original series at DC called Bloodhound. It got really good reviews and got canceled really fast because no one bought it. But the standard thing there is that when you create something, the artist and the writer share co-creator credit. It was kind of funny because Drew Johnson and I were like, we were roommates at the time, and so he did the character sketch, the concepts, and I wrote the pitch and the scripts, and then there was a delay about when it was going to start up production, and during that delay, he got poached and put on Wonder Woman. So like the co-creator never worked on the book. But then I got the rights back and took it to Dark Horse and did another volume, and we shifted things around so that now it's all me. But for other things, like I did a thing called Obergeist, and through Top Cow, and that was me and Tony Harris and Ray Snyder. It was me, the penciler, and the inker, and we share ownership of it. And I mean, it's really like, especially when you're the one putting the team together, it's really just up to you to decide who's going to get the credit and how. The thing I'll say is that all of that needs to be very carefully delineated in writing, officially, legally, before you get started, because that careful delineation is the way to preserve friendships. If you're like, yeah, this is how we're going to do it, shake hands and go and do it, and years later, your comic book gets turned into an incredibly successful TV series, and you don't have all the exact documentation, you might have one of the creative team that is really, really angry about how things turned out. And I want to avoid that at all costs.
The lawyer in me agrees. That's how you avoid lawsuits.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Yeah. And a lot of times, I've had, co-ownership, co-creating things with artists where the artist and I are just talking and we come up with an idea together. And it's just, hey, I like this idea, and we kind of hammer out some things. Then I go off and write it, send it to them. They read it over. Oh, I like this, and they go off and draw. So, but at the end of the day, we own it. We still have. But again, it's all in writing. Who owns what, but that way we all have say in it. We can, have some ownership in it. We can have ways of pitching it wherever, and yeah.
Before I close it up, any final comments, Amparo, on this question, or Danny on this question, or on anything else that we've talked about today?
I feel like I've already answered this question earlier, but everything's up for negotiation when you're the one with the cash.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, you gotta have your contract in case anything goes wrong, even if it doesn't really amount to very much, and there probably will never be any residuals, because it's a small project. But you still do it, so everything's clear. I am glad that I think that way, because I don't suspect I'll ever have those sorts of handshake deal problems. And 20 years from now, I'm going to be thanking myself, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I know we've talked, especially the last few questions, we've gone into some of the downsides of comics, but I want to say too, and I think everybody here will agree because we all do it. Creating comics can be fun. I mean, there's a lot of fun to be had. I love writing them. I love, one of the greatest feelings in the world is having art pages come into my inbox and seeing it for the first time. I love that. That is, there's an excitement that goes along with that. And so so even though it is still a business, and like any business, it's got its ups and downs, I do love it. And I try to write comics as often as I can.
Well, thank you all so much. With the last few minutes before we get into the rest of the time, for those of you who will be staying on for our live session, which as of the day of this recording, that's like 5 weeks from now. But in 5 weeks, when we finish this with the live, I would love it if you could tell those that are listening where we can find you. And I know that I started with Dan at the beginning, because again, I'm just going off my list. I'd love to start with Amparo. Tell us, where can we find your stuff? Where can we find you if we want to reach out to you or follow you on social media?
Well, my website is www.amparoortiz.com. You'll find all my links to all of my work there. And if you have Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok, I am at Amparo_Ortiz. And on TikTok, it's _author after Ortiz. But yeah, I have a book coming out this next or upcoming September. It is another anthology, but it's my very first young adult horror anthology that I'm actually co-editing. So it's my very first co-editor credit. And I also have a short story in there, but we don't focus on that. And yeah, that's my next work in graphic form is coming out next summer. It is a middle grade fantasy set in Puerto Rico. So, and that one is titled Saving Chupi. It's with HarperCollins, and I'm really excited.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we appreciate it. I'm excited to hear more about it. Bobby, tell us what's going on and where we can find you.
Well, you can find me at bobbynash.com. There's links to everything there. I'm author Bobby Nash on Facebook, Bobby Nash Writes on Instagram, and at Bobby Nash on Twitter. Yeah, feel free to stop by and say hello.
Danny?
I continue to not have a normal website, but you can find my work generally at coffee.com/Danny Gorny, all one word. And I think by the time this airs, I will be live on Kickstarter with issue 2 of Cygnus Imperium, in which my giant robot punches more spaceships.
Nice.
Awesome. All right, Dan?
You can find me at danjolley.com. And if you go there and hit subscribe, you can sign up for my monthly newsletter, which is, it's from my graphic novel roots, because it's like a photographic comic strip every month, where it's like me with voice balloons, and I argue with my cats, and I have guest authors. In fact, Bobby was my first ever guest author.
Oh.
That was a fun experience.
And if you sign up, you get a free novella called The Last of the Electric Knights, which is about a silver alloy robot built by Nikola Tesla to fight werewolves.
Awesome.
And also, if you, that Amparo, that reaction was appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, my brain melted. Thank you.
And also, I have there's a button on there called blog series. I have a blog series called How to Write the Way I Write. I'm not saying it's
that's the best title. Sold.
I'm not saying it's the way that you have to write. I'm just saying it's the way I do it. And what that is a nuts and bolts how-to on writing comic book scripts. Everything I know about writing comic book scripts is there.
Awesome. Well, that sounds fantastic. And when this does air, June 10, June 11, whenever we're formally set, if you guys have anything else that we want to pitch or talk about, I know that we will have time. With that, I'm going to stop the recording, and those of the panelists that are remaining for the live session, they'll be here if any questions have come up from the audience. But other than that, thank you all so much.